here on the first episode of Sports Slice. Super excited to be talking with you guys. We've got some crazy news stories going on. Obviously, the NBA and the NHL playoffs have started. Being a Philly sports fan, obviously super exciting time having both the 76ers and the Flyers in the postseason. But the biggest story going on right now, and it's been talked about recently, but even more right now, is the A.J. Brown Eagles Patriots trade situation. Is it going to happen? Is it not? It seems like every other week there's a different story that's popping up. There's a different opinion. You've got Howie Roseman and Nick Sirianni both saying that A.J. Brown is a member of the Eagles organization. And there's really been nobody from the Eagles organization that has said, hey, we definitely are looking to trade A.J. Brown. Obviously, I don't think Howie Roseman would do something like that. Obviously, he's playing his cards right. But this situation has evolved where now we have, instead of different, maybe smaller reporters talking about A.J. Brown being traded post June 1, now we have none other than the Adam Schefter, who tweeted out saying that he expects the Eagles to trade A.J. Brown to the New England Patriots post June 1. Now, obviously, that June 1 date is super important for the Eagles, especially with their cap situation, because if the Eagles were to either trade or release A.J. Brown before June 1st, the Eagles would owe $40 million in dead cap. Not an ideal situation. That's not a situation where a team could be any sort of successful in the near future. But if they wait till that after that June 1st date, then because of the NFL's rules, they can split that $40 million up into 2 years. So the dead cap situation in 2026 would only be $16.3 million, and they'd save about $7 million. And in 2027, it would be $27.1 million. Obviously, still not the ideal situation. However, there's so many people that are actually claiming, just because of the turmoil that happened this past season and some of the, maybe we'll say, cryptic tweets that were going on, that A.J. Brown doesn't want to be an Eagle. The Eagles don't want A.J. Brown. Now, me being a biased Eagles fan, I personally don't see that. I think that there are different outside sources that maybe are reporting some things that, could have some validity to it. I do think that there obviously was some maybe animosity between both sides, and there was obviously some weeks where the Eagles offense didn't perform and there was some frustration. But I do think that obviously it'd be in both teams, or both sides' best interest if, obviously A.J. Brown stays in Philly, and it creates a whole big other situation of what do the Eagles get in return if they do trade A.J. Brown, which I don't think is going to happen, but let's say it does. We've seen other trades this past offseason where teams are getting a first and a third for, their star receivers that they're trading. Is A.J. Brown getting a first? Do the Eagles trade A.J. Brown for maybe a second or a third in 2027 or 2028? That would be unideal. The other topic that's being flown around regarding this whole situation is Howie going to, trade A.J. for what's being talked about now is maybe a first in 2027 and maybe a first in 2028. But if it's just a first in 2027, do the Eagles trade up and go and try to get a guy like Jordan Tyson in the top 10 pick? Essentially, you'd be giving up A.J. Brown and a first-round pick, in return getting a guy like Jordan Tyson. Obviously, there's so many different situations that could, transpire. The other thing, too, that's important to note, that right now, A.J. Brown's not reporting to off-season programs for the Eagles organization, which makes sense because he doesn't know what his future is. You go 1 week where it's like, hey, A.J. Brown for sure going to be an Eagle. Next week, now we have something like this. Having done an interview with A.J. Brown, my whole thing was like, hey, I'm going to see if A.J. Brown says go Birds. Because everybody's saying, hey, A.J. Brown doesn't want to be an Eagle. So me being an Eagles fan, I was like, hey, at the end of this interview, I'm going to, dap him up and say go Birds. And he specifically looked back into the camera, looked into the mic and said, go Birds. Now, if a guy didn't want to be in an organization, why would he do that? That's my biggest thing. That's my biggest takeaway. But we'll see what happens here in these next couple weeks. Nothing's going to happen before the draft, though. That's the biggest thing. The next topic, we already kind of touched on it. NHL playoffs, NBA playoffs. I want to give a big shout out. Now, obviously, I'm a Flyers fan, but I got to give a massive shout out to the Buffalo Sabres organization. Down 3-0 to the Bruins, game one. They scored 4 unanswered goals to win just their first playoff game in over 5,000 days. Now, I'm very blessed as a Philly sports fan that we've seen, a lot of success here in recent years. But I just could not imagine going over 5,000 days without seeing your favorite franchise winning a playoff game, let alone even making the playoffs. Their last playoff win came in April of 2011. That is 15 years ago. That's just unbelievable to think. Like, that's an entire almost generation of fans that have not seen their team, let alone go to the playoffs, but win a playoff game, which is just unbelievable. Obviously, got to give a shout out to the Flyers, though. Beating Pittsburgh on the road, massive deal. One of the biggest rivalries in all of sports. Super exciting, obviously, getting to see the Penguins and Flyers rivalry renewed. And I think it's going to continue to be a super physical, high-octane style play that we're going to see throughout the rest of the this first round matchup. NBA wise, the Lakers proved, now you got to put an asterisk by it because Kevin Durant didn't play, but the Lakers proved that they can win without some of their star powers, and not having some of the other guys that the Lakers were missing, and it just being the LeBron show. I mean, the Lakers looked okay. Now, again, no Kevin Durant. That could change some things going forward throughout the rest of the postseason here. If Kevin is able to play and the Lakers, don't get guys like Luka back here in time, might be a short series. However, though, you win game one, anything can happen the rest of the series here. Looking at the rest of the NBA's first round here, the Spurs are legit, the Celtics are legit, and the Thunder are all legit. I mean, the Celtics completely dismantled the 76ers. Now, obviously, the 76ers don't have Joel Embiid right now as he's recovering from his appendix surgery, I believe it was. That might be a quick series. It might be a 4-0 series if the 76ers can't get Joel Embiid back. There's just so much firepower on the Celtics offense that it was honestly pretty painful to watch. Obviously, as a 76ers fan, you have a lot of high expectations, but it's a different class. The Nuggets and the Timberwolves series might be the series to watch, though. You have two offenses that are just so unbelievably talented. And, these are going to be really high-scoring games. I think the final score was like 116 to 101 or something like that, somewhere's in there. But both these teams could put up points in a hurry. Obviously, the Timberwolves had a bad third quarter. I think they finished with 17 points in the third quarter, and Denver had 29. So, that was really the main difference of that game. But both these teams are going to be going back and forth. And this series could go to 7. But I think if you had to pick an early pick for the series of the playoffs, it's going to be the Nuggets Timberwolves. Now going towards the NFL draft here just in a couple days, we obviously saw some big, crazy trades here recently. The biggest one obviously being the Bengals trading for Dexter Lawrence with the Giants. Obviously, we know Dexter Lawrence didn't want to be a Giant. The Bengals gave up a top 10 pick for Dexter Lawrence, which Dexter Lawrence is for sure worth it. It's just very fascinating to see the Bengals finally kind of invest on their defense. Giants now hold the 5th and 10th overall picks. It's a very interesting tidbit. The Giants GM last week was down in Arizona watching Jordan Tyson's pro day and had dinner with him. Giants need a receiver. I think everybody knows that. The Giants need a receiver bad. Jordan Tyson, if he can stay healthy, is the best receiver in the NFL draft. Now, the if he can stay healthy part is obviously a massive thing. Staying in Arizona, Jeremiah Love, I think, is the consensus best player in this year's draft. However, based on team needs, he's not obviously going to go number 1. There's some people that are saying, hey, he could go in the top 5. He could go in the top 15. He may somehow fall to the middle to the late round of the first. The middle to late part of the first. I think he goes to Arizona at 3. Arizona needs a lot of help on offense. If you got a guy like Jeremiah Love sitting there at 3, why not take a chance on him? You're not really taking a chance. You have the best prospect in the draft. He's going to be a difference maker. He can catch the ball well. He's like a younger version of Christian McCaffrey. He is such a dynamic playmaker. And then you pair him up with a quarterback that the Cardinals are going to draft in Ty Simpson. Now, the Cardinals have the 34th overall pick in the second round. Do they go and take Ty Simpson? If he's there, 100%. I think that what is more likely, though, is the Cardinals say, hey, we're going to pull like a move like the Baltimore Ravens did with Lamar Jackson and trade back up into the first. They're probably going to have to give up a second and a third to get, just move up a couple spots. But Ty Simpson's their guy. He's been linked to them for the past couple weeks. Like, if Ty Simpson's there, if they think somebody's going to take Ty Simpson before 34, they're 100% going to try to trade up. But you pair Ty Simpson with Jeremiah Love, that's a pretty dynamic offense, especially because, they also have one of the better tight ends in all of the NFL in Trey McBride. One of the more fascinating stories, though, that's been coming out the last couple days with the NFL draft, though, is none other than LSU quarterback Garrett Nussmeier. So obviously Garrett got benched this year, did not play well at all. If we were talking this time last year, most people had Garrett Nussmeier as a top 5, top 10 pick. Same thing with Drew Aller from Penn State. Obviously, Drew was dealing with some injuries of his own, and Penn State really struggled. So you got these two guys that have first-round talent that are going to be drafted kind of in the middle, maybe 4 through 6 rounds. Garrett Nussmeier, though, it came out that he actually had a cyst on his spine that was causing his oblique pain this past season that wasn't found out until the combine. Now, I guess what's coming out now is he could undergo like a 2 to 3 week procedure that it's super minimal, won't have any long-term effects, won't have any short-term effects. He'll be back, like I said, in 2 to 3 weeks. Here's a guy that the root of his issues this past season, now you take coaching and everything like that away, the root of his issues this past season could have been from this cyst. If that's the case, and he's back to being his normal self that we saw last year and the year prior, you literally have Kirk Cousins or a Brock Purdy situation where you draft a guy in, we'll say, the 4th, the 5th, or the 6th round, and this guy comes out during training camp and just balls out, right? You're drafting a pretty quality quarterback there. And you could say the same thing about Drew. Now, obviously, Drew's situation is a little bit different. There wasn't some unique underlying medical cause that we know of that was causing, his, we'll say, regression in play. But like I said, these are two guys that could make a name for themselves very early, depending on where they get drafted. You could see maybe Garrett gets drafted by like a team like Arizona. Like we saw Washington a handful of years ago. You draft RG3 in the 1st round and Kirk Cousins later in the 6th round. Is this the same thing? Like we'll say the Cardinals draft Ty Simpson in the 1st and then Nussmeier in, the 6th or the 7th, if he's there. And, you got 2 young guys that are battling it out with Jacoby Brissett. Anything could happen. So it'll be exciting to watch what happens and what unfolds with the draft here later this week. But I think there's going to be some draft trades also, draft day trades, whether it's, a day 1 situation or a day 2 situation. But I think there's going to be a lot of trades here upcoming in the next couple weeks. Coming up, we'll have the director of the East-West Shrine Bowl in Eric Galko, and he's going to help me preview the upcoming NFL draft. And we're going to be talking about, what teams look for in the draft, some maybe players that are falling underneath the radar, and some of his personal favorite players in this year's draft. So I'm here with Eric Galko, the Director of Operations for the East-West Shrine Bowl. And for some people that may not know, this is actually my former boss at Optimum Scouting. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, buddy. Good to talk to you, man. Let's do it.
Good to talk to you. It's been a while, man.
I know. Been a while for our face-to-face, man. Let's talk some draft.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously the draft's later this month, and you're the guy that knows it all. The guy behind the scenes that literally knows it all. I can attest to it. So we're going to jump right into these questions here. First questions. Obviously, there's a lot of fans that listening to the podcast and are on TikTok and everything like that. And the fans tend to focus more on results and stats when looking at players and, their evaluations in the draft.
Right.
But for you personally, when you're evaluating a player, how do you weigh the process versus the outcome of players? And how do you separate how maybe a play developed versus how it actually turns out?
Yeah, I mean, I think from a you're talking about like draft strategy, right? If you're an NFL GM,
Yep.
like how do you assess not ruining the draft, right? And I'll be clear, like most NFL GMs, understandably so, right? The goal is to not screw this up, right? You want to find great players, but like, hey, the Seahawks back in the 2010s, and they drafted Russell Wilson, like that whole run there, like John Schneider will tell you, like, hey, we just hit base hits a lot and got lucky a couple times, but like 4 of our 7 draft picks hit. As a GM, if 4 of your 7 draft picks hit, you're a Hall of Fame GM, right? It's like in baseball, like if you get a hit 1 every 4 times, you're going to be in the Hall of Fame. Like same idea in the NFL draft. So I think for teams, you want to find as often as possible high floor players, guys that, hey, this guy's going to make our roster. He's going to contribute in some way. And you're better off taking an offensive lineman in the first 2 rounds who ends up being your backup, but a good backup, versus taking a swing and a miss on some edge rusher, right? And a lot of NFL GMs think that way. So I think from a drafting philosophy, you want to kind of take your chances when you can, because obviously those star players are going to make or break your team in the Super Bowl. But overall, as a front office, like you want to hit base hits and get guys on your roster, because you never know when that guy's going to be Brock Purdy, Russell Wilson, et cetera, kind of players will too. So when evaluating these guys, it's important for NFL GMs and people in my shoes to think about, hey, if this doesn't go exactly the way we think it's going to go, what's this guy's floor going to be? Hey, is this guy going to be a great returner or a special teams player? Can this guy play left and right tackle? Can this quarterback be personally and mentally good in a quarterback room if it works out or not too? Like all those things are really important for NFL GMs.
And so would you say that in a sense, kind of some of the mid to late round picks are more crucial and more, we'll say, valuable to a team than maybe like, hey, you get the 1 first round guy, the sure lock, and then maybe you struggled, 2nd through 7th round?
I think a lot of NFL GMs think of the draft this way is, hey, 1st and 2nd round, I can't make mistakes, right? I'm not going to have a job off making mistakes there. The 3rd and 4th round and maybe the 5th round, you're like, hey, let's just get guys who can make our teams. And that 6th, 7th round is almost kind of it's a bonus, a dart throw, but also, hey, if I can hit on a 6th round pick, then if I mess up a 2nd, I'm okay. It cancels out, right? So NFL teams think of it that way as well. And, someone like myself who kind of projects what the draft's going to be at all 7 rounds, as a receiver, for example, hey, almost every receiver drafted between the 5th and the 7th round the last decade had clear special teams value, return value, whatever else, right? So like you can kind of predict how the end of the draft's going to go, because if you can't do those things, that's when you're like, wow, I can't believe that guy went undrafted. He was a great player at LSU or Alabama or whatever. It's more often than not, they don't have that value to be that late round pick as well too. So for NFL teams, like they view the draft in those chunks. 1st, 2nd round, get a great player, build your franchise. 3rd, 4th, 5th, don't mess up. 6th, 7th, take some chances, but try to find a guy that can make your roster and maybe make up for a mistake you had elsewhere.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And so with that kind of segueing into this, what's something maybe some of the casual fans kind of miss when it matters in scouting? Like I said, a lot of fans kind of hyper fixate on the statistics. So like what's something that maybe you hear constantly where like fans are talking, it's like, hey, this is a surefire, stud NFL guy because he put up 1,000 yards. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think for one, that's a cop-on answer, which I won't use, which is like the character piece. And again, I go back to like NFL GMs are risk averse. They don't want to screw up picks. So sometimes when the guy is not the right character, when you see a guy fall out of the draft, sometimes it's because he doesn't have a role on special teams. More often than not, it's because the medical was really bad and there's some long-term issues with him. Or like the character, like, I just don't trust this guy. It's as simple as that sometimes. But from an on-field standpoint, one thing we train a lot of our scouts to do and do, it sounds dumb, but like, just think about this guy in the NFL for a second. Like that sounds so obvious, but just like you watch him in film as a receiver, right? Wow, he's explosive. He can work downfield. The yards per catch is incredible, right? He's 6'4". And you're just like watching him and like, I watch football on Sundays. Will this guy work in the NFL? And more often than not, you'll find a lot of like, let me think for a second, right? Or a guy's background, right? Hey, a guy is like, there's a guy in this draft, Peter Woods, for example, from Clemson, right? Peter Woods was a 5-star recruit, high character guy. He's played DN and D tackle, and he's a really good athlete as a defensive lineman. Hey, this year he didn't have as many sacks this year. let's not overthink this one. This guy is awesome. Let's just take this guy, right? I think sometimes as fans, you kind of ebb and flow based off what they're doing in one game or one play or a couple stats. When like, hey, if you just take a step back and think for a second, Chase Basantis of Texas A&M as an offensive lineman, 5-star, 3-year starter at Texas A&M, had a great college career. Yeah, his arms are shorter, but like this guy's going to play 15 years in the NFL. Like stuff like that, just like thinking for a minute, I think you'll be a much better scout from a distance because you'll be thinking things in the right way.
For sure. And I think just from what, obviously my experience and then obviously what you've been saying, I think too, like, a player that has the ability to, be a plug and play, whether it's on the offensive line, maybe he's a right guard right now, but he can translate and play left guard or center, whatever the case may be. I think of like Landon Dickerson from the Eagles, being an Eagles fan.
Yeah.
Obviously, I think, it sounds like a lot of the GMs and guys in the NFL kind of put that in high regard also.
Yeah, 100%. Because the benefit of being kind of risk averse and drafting for safety is you don't know who's going to hit either, right? Like you can take a 6th, 7th round guy that like, hey, this guy just comes in and makes our roster, will be happy. Oh my God, he's our franchise left tackle. That happens more often than not in the NFL. So that's why hitting kind of base hits, once these guys get there, and again, these guys are being drafted at 21, 22. You don't know what their college situation was like. They go to the NFL and you'd be like, oh my God, we struck gold in the 5th round. We thought it was going to be a swing tackle for us, and that was our franchise guy. So that's another reason why NFL teams have learned, like, hey, just kind of hit base hits. Don't go crazy. Don't make big mistakes. And hopefully one of these guys hits in a big way like Landon Dickerson has for the Eagles.
Everybody talks about the quarterback position, and everybody's so fixated on the quarterback position because that's the guy, that's the guy that gets all the glory, all that kind of stuff. But what do you think is the hardest position to evaluate just based off of tape, and why is it long snappers?
I'm very lucky, man. We have a guy on my staff, Shane Coughlin, who you know Shane as well too. Shane is like one of the best specialist evaluators in and around the NFL. Like NFL teams will like look to what we invite to the Shrine Bowl because he's that good at it. So I watch almost zero long snapper film. So I'm very thankful. I know the numbers to hit and this whatever else, but I can like say like, hey, you know what? I'm not doing long snappers ever again, which as long as I have Shane in my life, I won't. But I think the real answer besides specialist is, at least for me, it's cornerback. And one thing we think about a lot in our staff, again, trying to think about these players in a big way too, is preventer versus creator positions. And creator positions are positions, receiver and edge rusher, where they're trying to create plays. And as a receiver and edge rusher, you can play 50 snaps in a game, and you can have 45 god-awful snaps. But if you have 5 great ones, those as a receiver, 5 catches, 200 yards, and 2 touchdowns, or as an edge rusher, 3 sacks and 2 tackles for a loss, you're a Hall of Famer, right? But 45 bad snaps is okay. Whereas if you're a preventer position, which is offensive line and corner, you can play 45 incredible snaps and 5 bad ones. And if your corner gives up 5 touchdowns, you're out of a job. So those positions are always hard. An offensive line, I've gotten a good sense for, and you can kind of see some things, you watch it. But corner, you're playing off of safety. There's different schemes and roles you're following. The length and the body type is great, but those guys end up being stiffer as well too. So at corner, like you kind of want guys who are just really good on-ball defenders like in basketball, right? Like those guys usually work as well too, but assessing those guys and their value at the college level, that's a position where we see the most like 5th round guys become plug and play starters more than any other position as well too. So corners is probably me being honest, like one of the spots that I need the most kind of support with and talk with, but also I think for NFL teams, like it ends up being the most random and volatile position where like a 1st round pick is nowhere to be found. A 5th round guy starts as a rookie. It's usually corner in that mindset.
Now, once upon a time, you used to play corner, didn't you?
I played.
If I remember correctly.
I have a picture up here in high school. Yeah, right here.
We go.
I dropped 9 interceptions in high school in 1 year.
Oh,
dropped
man.
9 interceptions, but I allowed no completions.
How many did you catch though?
I caught 0, but I bobbled 1, and a buddy of the safety at the time caught my bobble and ran it back for a touchdown. That's how unlucky I am.
It works though. I mean,
it counts. It'll count.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's awesome though.
I was a corner
I can't believe I remember
in high
that.
school. That's a hilarious fact that you remember as well, too. No one really knows that, but I love that picture because it reminds me that I sucked as an athlete. Those who can't do scout, that's what I say.
Love that. Yeah. So kind of getting back on track here, what do you think is one trait? Now, I know we've kind of touched on it a little bit, but what's one trait do you think that translates to the NFL better than people like actually realize? And it could be position specific or just in general.
I think that it's kind of like, it feels like not really a trait, but I have seen that guys that have, self-confidence off the field, but also self-confidence in their ability. Like, I'd rather a guy who's a 4'6" athlete play like a 4'6" guy than constantly be chasing or like, hey, I got to make up the speed elsewhere as well too. Like the guys that play within themselves. Again, I'm a big basketball guy too. Like if you ever pick up basketball, like the older guys who just like know where to go on the court, like they end up being good for much longer. And very few guys out of college kind of have that self-confidence of knowing what they can and can't do. So the trade is kind of like awareness, I guess I would say, if I'm putting it on Madden rating on it, of like, hey, I know how to play my game. And, there are some receivers that like, they can't win with speed, but they try to, but the smart guys that aren't as fast know how to set up and control their speeds and use their footwork as well too. And you see the really sophisticated college guys every year where like, hey, that guy knows how to really maximize what he's great at versus what he's not. Guys like Amon-Ra St. Brown, for example, out of college, like he was so good at that. And this is a guy that's not a freak athlete, but he's unguardable in the NFL because he has a great situational awareness, knows what he can and can't do, knows how to adjust his body. And I think those guys coming out of college have the longest staying power, and when they are good athletes and are talented players, those guys become stars really, really quickly. Buku Nakua, another great example of knows how to win. Again, not a great athlete, a really good receiver, and he's great because he knows how to play within himself constantly.
And then I guess on the flip side, what is something that looks great in college but doesn't necessarily carry over to the NFL? So like, I think of, there's so many people that, again, fixate on, for specifically with receivers, guys that are super fast. I think of like the John Rosses of the world, right? They put up the insane numbers, we'll call it like the workout warriors, and, it doesn't necessarily translate to the NFL because, sure, anybody can run a 40, and run straight directly down the field, but like, do they have the abilities to, be a successful receiver in the NFL? So like, what's something that like looks great, but doesn't really matter too much in the NFL, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably more position specific, but I would say in general, kind of straight line speed in every aspect. And, I would say that for receivers, for example, we had a guy at the Shrine Bowl, Dante Thornton, who ended up being a 4th-round pick because he has incredible straight line speed. But one of his strengths that he's so physical on the perimeter as well, too. That's why Chip Kelly and the Raiders want him, is that he can also win vertically. And as a receiver, being fast is part of it, but also getting off press, right? Setting up your speed is how, hey, if a team has a guy that can run a 4-3, they can get off press. Now that team has to play cover 2, cover 3. They can't play man as often, right? Because he can just beat them vertically one-on-one. And now you're forcing the defense to do something because of that player. And then guys like Tyreek Hill is different than John Ross, who also was fast too, because Tyreek Hill is much looser, more fluid, more agile than John Ross was. And Tyreek Hill could track the ball better over his shoulder than John Ross could as well too. Not to bash John Ross, the poor guy, but like the reason why if Tyreek Hill was a 4-4, not a 4-2 guy, he'd still be in the NFL was my point, right? So,
right.
And straight line speed. And then for edge rushers running a 40 time, like, doesn't always translate that right way. And for most positions, especially in today's NFL where corners are longer, where there are better athletes at linebacker and safety and corner across the board, it's much more important to be agile, short area explosive, balanced, have great body control, like we see guys like Amon-Ra St. Brown, than just the top end athletes. Because now, like, hell, man, there's linebackers that can cover receivers in the NFL. Like, not all game long, but like a lot of these guys can do that. And that was never a thing 7 years ago, not to mention 30 years ago. So I think just being like naturally top end speed on either side of the ball is still great, but kind of everyone's fast. And the guys that can play within themselves to be more short area explosive and be more purposeful, those guys are much more valuable, whether you're receiver or whether you're linebacker, running back, etc.
Right. And then we're going to get into some actual draft stuff here.
Yeah.
The moment everybody's probably been waiting to talk about. So obviously with your position, who's a player right now that you think the media is not high on enough? Obviously everybody right now is talking about Fernando Mendoza with the Raiders. And, Ty Simpson's starting to be talked about a lot right now with potentially with the Jets. Maybe he falls the second round, all that kind of stuff. But who's a guy just in general, doesn't have to be a quarterback, who's a guy that you think is not, kind of on people's radar right now?
I'll say two guys that jump out to me that I think fans will be excited about. One is a guy named Malachi Lawrence. He's an edge rusher from UCF. This is a guy that's been really well liked by NFL teams throughout the process. He played in the East-West Shrine Bowl, so I'm a bias on that front. But a dynamic athlete and a guy who's still ascending as an edge rusher. And every NFL team needs pass rushers. We're going to see Arvell Reese, if you count him as an edge rusher, David Bailey, Reuben Bain, all off the board in the first 10 picks. But after that, every team, whether you're a rebuilding team or a playoff team, you want athletic edge rushers to, again, at least be your third edge rusher guy and generate pressure, or best case, be a starter who you can have for multiple years on a great contract. Malachi Lawrence is going to be a first-round pick. Media doesn't really see that quite yet, but I think he's going to be there, and a guy that you'll be really smart when you're talking about with your friends about how the draft's going to go, putting Malachi Lawrence in your top 15, 20 overall picks. And then from a guy that I just love, I got to know this player quite a bit as a person, and because of injury, he's kind of been forgotten about, but Chris Bell at Louisville. Every NFL scout I've ever talked to about Chris Bell that's watched him, one of two players comes up, and usually both guys. This guy is A.J. Brown or peak Deebo Samuel. Now, he got an injury late in the season, I think in November, at Louisville, and he's been recovering. He'll be healthy for training camp. But I think you're getting A.J. Brown and maybe in like the mid to late second round for NFL teams. And I think if you want to, we saw Carnell Tate, Makai Lemon, and Jordan Tyson, and even like guys like Omar Cooper from Indiana and Casey Concepto of A&M kind of all be first round guys, and they're great. Without injury, Chris Bell would be in that top tier of guy in this year's draft class. So again, if you want to sound smart, Chris Bell is a guy that by round 2, if he's still there, you got to be praying your team gets him because he's the A.J. Brown 2.0.
And I know it's tough to do, but do you have any projections on where they go, like team specific?
I think it's still a little early for that for a lot of players. It's funny how the draft, from my point of view, usually ends up. Like, I have a better sense of who teams might take in the 4th to 7th round, because those were teams differ drastically, and like some teams love certain guys, right? And I can have a couple guys I know from the Shrine Bowl, which I won't share and get people in trouble, but like some guys are like, hey, that team's gonna take him in the 4th round. Like, I'm positive, right? They love him. They need to have a need there, whatever else. But the first couple rounds, like after the first couple of picks, like teams don't know what they're gonna do either. So usually by the draft weekend, about a week or two of the draft, I'll shoot you a text to him and tell you how the first round's going to go, because I get pretty accurate by the end of it. But for right now, I'll tell you, man, like teams after the first 1 or 2 picks in this draft, like don't have a real plan about what the draft's going to go like yet.
That makes sense. I mean, there's always so many trades that happen. Like, who would have thought the Eagles a couple years ago would have traded for A.J. Brown? Not me, that's for sure. But is there any small school guys this year that you're super interested in? What I remember is like you were a big like, hey, like love the small school guys, give them a chance, give them opportunity if obviously they deserve it. Is there anybody that like you think, hey, like this guy could potentially be a quality backup in the NFL? I know Joe Cooper from Slippery Rock was at the East West Shrine Bowl. But is there anybody else that you could think of?
Obviously with the transfer portal, it's been really hard for guys at the FCS and D2 level to like be there for understandable reasons. Like, hey, you might love your program, but if someone's offering you $1 million to transfer up to play at Ohio State, like you're going to do it. Who's going to blame these guys? So I think the smaller schools have kind of faded away, and we only have a couple guys drafted. But I'll tell you the one guy that has a lot of attention. Again, sorry to keep using guys in the trenches. I know that's not as sexy, but these are real players. Caleb Proctor from Southeast Louisiana as a D tackle. Reminds a lot of NFL teams of Grady Jarrett or Kobe Turner with the Rams, who's been hugely impactful for them as another Shrine Bowl guy and a 3rd-round pick. But Proctor is a guy that, despite being at a smaller school, he played LSU to start the year. You can go watch the game if you want to. I think it's on YouTube. And again, this guy was not a seeker coming in there. He was clearly their best player on the whole defense. And it's Southeast Louisiana, right? No offense. They're not littered with NFL draft prospects, and it's LSU. And Proctor still had 2 sacks, 4 more pressures. Like, he wrecked LSU in that week 1 game that the team had a double, triple team all the time. That's how impactful he was. And as a small school player who's maybe the level of competition comes up, you hear that term all the time. Like, this guy played LSU and then dominated, came to the Shrine Bowl, dominated all week long, had a fantastic NFL Combine workout. I think he's probably the only guy at a smaller school that's going to be a top 100 pick in this year's draft class. But again, if you want to sound smart, like Caleb Proctor's a sleeper to know, because he's going to go from being Southeast Louisiana, who's already proved it against teams like LSU and at the Shrine Bowl. He'll be a top 100 pick, and I think he'll make a huge impact for teams, a playoff team this next upcoming playoffs, because he's going to be a guy that you want to play for 15, 20 snaps, and he'll have a sack or 2 in a playoff game that makes a difference.
And I know you kind of just mentioned that actually with him. But is there anybody, examples of players that really helped themselves during the Shrine Bowl week and the Shrine Bowl game itself? And maybe what did they do differently to kind of separate themselves from the rest of the group?
Yeah, I mean, I would say the draft process, I run an event in the draft process, and it can be overrated a bit sometimes, right? These guys are not showing some things that are radically different than their college experience, but a lot of these guys are kind of pull out of their comfort zone. Hey, you might be in the same defense with the same scheme, with the same guys around you for 2 years, and of course, you're going to have success, but I'm going to throw you to the Shrine Bowl and have you going against a guy you've never played against and a top 100 pick in front of you that can really impress as well, too, and kind of see how you do. A couple guys jump out. One is Skylar Bell, receiver from UConn. Had a great practice when he was at the Shrine Bowl, and a guy that was crazy productive, should have won the Bolitnikoff Award this year as the best year in the country, but kind of plucked out of the UConn where he was the star of the show, came to the Shrine Bowl, and he was still the star of the show all week long. Harold Perkins, linebacker from LSU, you guys may know that name. He was a top recruit, LSU star player, some injuries and maybe some struggles in the LSU defense. He wasn't as talked about as much, but came to the Shrine Bowl. He played linebacker, edge rusher, played some safety, showed that versatility and showed that he can be a top 100 pick again as well. And I would say another guy too, an offensive lineman, which can be a really big offensive line draft this year, Jagger Burton of Kentucky, and a guy that NFL teams came to the Shrine Bowl, and most teams told me, hey, this was a guy that went from being a day 3 guy to a day 2 guy in this draft class at center as well, too. So those are 3 guys that jump out. And to mention a quarterback, I'll mention Joe Fagnano from UConn, a guy that people definitely hadn't heard of before this year. That's your guy? Look at that, hit nail on the head right there. Outstanding player, NFL team. He was one of 4 or 5 guys that I got calls on midseason. Hey, you're inviting Joe Fagnano, right? To make sure from a bunch of teams, proactive on their end, just because they want to see this guy in a different situation, but had a great week of practice. And, the draft is never something I'm always confident in, but he's going to get drafted. The question is how early, and don't be surprised if Joe Fagnano, after his draft process, especially gets drafted ahead of guys who were viewed as first-round picks once upon a time, or in the college football playoff. He's going to go earlier than people realize, because NFL teams just see a plug-and-play NFL quarterback in their mindset. So those are some guys that I think did a great job at the Shrine Bowl this year and benefited from it.
That's awesome. Okay, and then last question for you here.
Yeah.
This is I saved this one for last just because, it's something that everybody always talks about, but nobody ever truly explains it.
Yeah.
When you hear the term football IQ, what are you actually looking for on tape?
I'm looking for, are they making the same mistakes over and over again? I think especially helpful for offensive linemen, for linebackers, really guys closer to the ball. It ends up being more helpful. But, football IQ it's almost like hip fluid. People just say it and no one knows what the hell it means.
Exactly.
It's define it, whatever. You know what I'm talking about. But it's a good question, because I view football IQ as, it's an impossible task to know what these guys should be thinking. You have to go with the linebacker coach and make sure that coach is unbiased, right? And not revisionist history and what happened as well, too. It's impossible to kind of get in what they should be doing at that point. But you as a scout can say, hey, and with the benefits of different tools, hey, let me watch all of this linebacker's plays against outside zone or inside zone, right? And if he's making the same mistakes or making the same mistake in the same game, now you're wondering, hey, can this guy process information at NFL level, right? You don't want to assume if he's smart or not. That's not fair. But if a guy's making the same mistake, or more importantly, not making that mistake again, hey, they pulled that guard in this play and he got hit by it. They tried again in the 4th quarter and he dodged it, made a play. Now I'm oh, this guy is impressive. And we train our scouts to kind of I call those margin notes, where hey, in the margins, if a guy makes a mistake or a play happens and you're all right, let me come back to that later. Just put a little note on what happened and come back to it too. And you try to, and that goes for quarterbacks, linebackers, running backs, reading a play, receivers going against zone coverage, receivers adapting their press release, right, over against a corner, doing the same thing over and over again. Same thing for DBs as well too. I think it's really important to kind of try to assess that and not try to say a guy's smart or dumb, say a guy has good or bad football IQ based off of other factors as well, not assuming every Harvard and Stanford guy is smart, right? Actually using the film to do it. But I think if you do it right and watch enough of these guys and take the time with it, you can get a sense of all right, can I trust this guy? Is this guy getting better? And can this guy actually, does he know what he's looking at, or he's just an athlete out there playing ball? Really important for film to do that stuff as well too.
Awesome. Well, that's all we got for you.
That's it? No hard questions. That's it. Easy ones. Where's Ty Simpson going? Who's a surprise first-round pick? No, I appreciate the time. That was great.
No, absolutely. You crushed it. I thought there was a couple, difficult questions in there, but
I'm just busting you, man. This is a lot of fun. I appreciate you having me on, buddy.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for listening to the first episode of Sports Slice. Make sure you hit the follow button on the iHeartRadio app and check out my TikTok, Timbo Slice Lift 12, and the TikTok Podcast Radio Network.